Do you believe that nature itself can act as a ruthless guardian, ready to protect its secrets and punish those who dare to disrespect it? In the heart of Kansas, a surprising story unfolds, revealing that sometimes punishment comes in a way no one expects. Imagine a thief, motivated by the desire for an easy scam, quietly entering an old barn, believing that his deed would go unnoticed. But what he did not know was that nature, with all its strength and unpredictability, had other plans. As soon as he broke down the door, a deafening bang echoed across the field, and a scene of chaos and natural violence unfolded before his eyes. An old nest of black marimbondos, hidden in the ceiling of the barn, fell apart with force, and a flood of aggressive insects took over the scene, turning that moment into something that looks like something out of a horror movie. What happens next is something that few could have imagined. The thief, frightened and disoriented, ran desperately, while the black marimbondos pursued him relentlessly, covering his entire body with a violence that seemed almost supernatural. Have you ever been in a situation where the force of nature seemed to be against you so relentlessly? Stay with me until the end, because what you will discover now may surprise you. The farmer, who witnessed everything from afar, just watched, shocked by the intensity of that natural punishment. For him, it was not just a thief trying to steal his precious things, but a direct lesson from nature itself, which turned out to be ruthless and fair. Minutes later, police arrived at the scene and found the man in a state of shock, begging for help as he tried to remove the insects that were still attacking him. The story of this episode, which became known in the region as "The Day the Farm Took Revenge," became a true legend, reminding everyone that, no matter how hard we try to control it, nature always finds a way to defend its balance. Have you ever thought about how the power of nature can manifest itself in unexpected ways? Prepare yourself, because what comes next will show you that sometimes the justice of the earth is more powerful than any human plan. If you found this story of the farmer and the black marimbondos surprising, leave in the comments what touched you the most, or what you think this situation reveals about the force of nature and our relationship with it. Your input is very important here, as it helps create a closer connection between all of us, and shows that we are not alone in reflecting on these amazing episodes. Also, if you liked the video so far, don't forget to like it, so we can continue bringing you this type of content that mixes real stories, mystery, and lessons that make us think. When you like it, you are helping the channel grow and reach more people who also like stories that show the power of nature and our vulnerability in front of it. If you want to follow more stories like this, subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications. Thus, you do not miss any news, and we can continue to share together these reports that make us reflect on the world around us. Your participation here is what makes this channel grow and reach more people with this type of content, bringing an increasingly strong community, curious and connected by the fascination of what is real and what surprises us. So stick with me, because there's still a lot more history, excitement, and learning coming out there. It was dawn in the heart of Kansas, and the farm rested in almost absolute silence. The gentle wind blew between the cornfields, swaying the leaves and creating a quiet melody, almost like a whisper of nature itself. The dim illumination of the moon slowly reflected off the windows of the sheds, while darkness enveloped every corner of the vast field, giving the feeling that the world had stopped for a moment. For those who lived there, it was an ordinary night, a night that seemed to follow the usual rhythm of the rural cycle, marked only by the sound of the stars and the occasional creak of dry wood in the wind. However, behind this backdrop of apparent calm, an invasion attempt was quietly preparing, fueled by an ambition for something easy, without imagining that, in the very shadow, a natural force of revenge was about to manifest itself in a brutal and unexpected way. For the farmer, that night was just another routine of work and rest, a break in the daily routine that, although tiring, brought a sense of peace. He was aware that life in the countryside often requires endurance and patience, but he also believed in the safety of his land, in the protection that his routine and his care provided. The farm was a sanctuary of hard work, crops and animal care, but also of history, tradition, and a lifetime's effort. When the night began to advance, the farmer's greatest concern was with small details, the sound of some strange animal, the movement of a suspicious light, or even the excessive silence that could indicate some problem. But at that moment, nothing seemed out of the ordinary. Everything indicated that the night would follow its usual trajectory. However, for the invader, Everything was an opportunity. A man who believed that stealing grain from a barn would be a quick action without great risks, thought that this would be an easy night to conquer. With silent steps he approached the building, planning to act discreetly, taking advantage of the darkness to hide. His intention was simple: go unnoticed, grab a few bags of corn or wheat and disappear before anyone noticed. He had no idea how much that seemingly simple action could trigger a chain of events that would change his life forever. Upon breaking down the barn door, his hope for success quickly turned into a nightmare. A loud bang broke the silence of the night, and suddenly a dark cloud formed on the roof of the shed. Something fell hard, causing the ground to shake under his feet and revealing an ancient nest of black marimbondos. The sound of the impact was like a warning signal, a silent threat that turned into an explosion of violence. The insects, awakened by the noise, came out of their hiding place with a wild fury, forming a dark and menacing mass that quickly spread throughout the environment. The thief, taken by surprise, tried to retreat, but it was too late. The black marimbondos, known for their aggressiveness and their potent sting, began to attack mercilessly, covering his body with an intensity that seemed almost supernatural. The scene became a chaos of movement and pain, a desperate struggle for survival. The invader, frightened and disoriented, began to run across the field trying to escape from that avalanche of angry insects. His steps were frantic, almost uncontrolled, while the marimbondos pursued him restlessly, covering every part of his body. At every instant, he felt the stinger piercing his skin, a sharp, unbearable pain, which only increased the feeling of despair. He knew that if he stopped for a moment, it could be fatal. That moment of vulnerability seemed to last an eternity, a real battle between the force of nature and the human attempt at dominance. That scenario of chaos and violence showed in a clear way that nature does not usually accept invasions or disrespect without a harsh and immediate response. The farmer, who watched everything from afar, was paralyzed for an instant. The scene was almost surreal, a vivid demonstration that the land itself had its justice, its way of protecting that which is its own. His expression of shock and disbelief reflected the intensity of what he witnessed. He had never seen anything like it. Such a direct lesson that no matter how hard we try to control or manipulate nature, she always finds a way to respond. And in that moment, what seemed like a simple theft attempt turned into a real lesson in respecting the power of wildlife. What would happen next, however, would be something no one could predict, a revelation that would change the perception of that episode forever. The man approached with slow and cautious steps, believing that his action would go unnoticed, like many others he had performed before. The night was silent, and the silence seemed to give him a false sense of security. His confidence was so great that when he reached the barn, he did not think twice. He thought only of the ease of the blow, of the quick reward he could get if he managed to catch the grains and disappear before anyone noticed. He believed that with a little silence and agility, he would be able to escape without a trace, without the residents noticing any suspicious movement. To him, everything seemed under control. Everything seemed to be according to his meticulous plan, which involved patience, silence, and speed. He knelt before the barn door, examining the lock carefully, as if he could find an easy loophole, a weakness that would help him get in without making a sound. His mind filled with thoughts of what he would do after picking up the beans, imagining the easy reward, the feeling of victory for having managed to deceive the safety of that place. It was a kind of mentality he had already cultivated over years of small invasions, each easier than the last. The feeling of invincibility was almost palpable. Confidence in himself and in his ability to go unnoticed drove him forward without fear, without hesitation. He raised his arms slowly, intending to force the door or break it down with a tool he had in his backpack. His eyes, attentive, searched for any warning signs around him, but the darkness seemed to hide everything. His head was full of thoughts about what could happen if he was caught, but these thoughts were drowned out by a growing arrogance, a false sense of dominance over the environment. He believed that if he could act quickly, he would get away with what he wanted and continue his robbery routine without major problems. He also believed that the farm was an easy victim, a prey that he could conquer without great difficulty. So, with a smile of satisfaction, he began to fiddle with the lock, confident that his plan would succeed, that nothing could stop him that night. However, What he didn't realize was that as he opened the door with force, a noise as loud as an explosion broke the silence of the night. An invisible force, silent and fierce, had been awakened in the structure of the barn. The former nests of black marimbondos, which for years had been hiding in the ceiling, were hit by the impact, and an avalanche of angry insects broke loose with impressive force. What seemed like a simple invasion turned into a battle of life and death. His confidence, which had seemed solid until then, began to crumble before the true power that nature demonstrated at that moment. The feeling of invulnerability that he carried until then turned into an irrational fear, an instinctive reaction of flight, hopelessness, and pain. From that moment on, everything changed. The scenario that once seemed controllable has become a death trap. Every step he took toward the interior of the barn turned into a desperate race, as the intensely aggressive marimbondos relentlessly pursued him. Their confidence had dissipated, giving way to a brutal fight for survival. What seemed like a quick and sure action turned into a nightmare of unimaginable proportions, where the force of nature itself proved ruthless and just in its response to the invader. This invasion, which began with the hope of an easy win, has become a symbol that no matter how hard we try to manipulate the world around us, there are forces beyond our control, which react unpredictably and often devastatingly. And in this moment of chaos, as insects mercilessly attack, the scene reveals a hidden truth that many still prefer to ignore, that of human vulnerability in the face of the impact of light decisions, of the arrogance of thinking that we can do anything, when in fact we are subject to a chain of effects that we cannot always foresee. That man's story, with all its confidence and ingenuity, serves as a reminder that sometimes the greatest impact comes from the very power of wildlife, which reacts with an intensity that defies logic, and that our journey of transformation often requires more than strength or strategy. It requires respect and humility in the face of what we cannot control. Now I want to go even deeper into this subject, as this story reveals to us that no matter how hard we try to dominate the environment, there is a hidden truth. Life always finds a way to balance things, often in a way that we would never imagine. With a sharp blow, the intruder tried to force the wooden door of the barn, hoping that his entrance would be quiet and quick, as he had always imagined. The crash that echoed through space was not just the sound of wood being broken into, but something much deeper, a rupture of an invisible layer of protection that for years had held secrets and stood the test of time. The instant the door gave way, the sound of shrapnel mixed with a barely perceptible vibration, but which in fact was the harbinger of a reaction that no one could have predicted. That noise did not pass unnoticed by the very soul of that place, and somehow nature, which until then had seemed silent and submissive, awoke from its sleep of years. That impact was like a gunshot, a sign that something ancient, something that lay hidden in the roof of the barn, had been hit, and it was at that moment that everything changed. A strong vibration, almost like a response, went through the walls, the wooden beams that supported the ceiling, and the nests of black marimbondos. The insects, which until then had remained silent, were now awake, angry, threatened, and just like a chain reaction, an avalanche of ferocity set in. A dark, menacing cloud rose from the ceiling, like a smoke of revenge, and quickly spread through space. The black marimbondos, known for their aggressiveness and stinger strength, went on an uncontrolled rampage, ready to defend their territory at any cost. The invader, who until then had thought himself invincible, was taken by surprise by this reaction. His confidence, which had previously seemed firm, began to crumble in the face of the chaos that was unfolding. He felt the weight of that cloud of angry insects approaching, like a mass of threatening shadows. He tried to retreat, but the marimbondos, moved by an instinctive force of protection, quickly surrounded him. His wounds began to appear, like marks of an unequal battle, a fight that he had not the slightest chance of winning. The insects, with their powerful stingers, spared no effort, and each bite felt like a stab in the skin, in a pain that intensified every moment. The feeling of vulnerability gripped the invader, who now had the clear realization that he had awakened a force that he could not control or dominate. The scene turned into a real natural hunt, a desperate struggle for survival. As he tried to flee, his steps became faster, more disorderly, hoping to escape that attack that seemed to have no end. Her skin began to be marked with red marks, the pains growing to an almost unbearable intensity. Each movement was an attempt to escape from the swarm, which relentlessly pursued him, as if he were a living entity, a force of nature that only fed on the fear and pain of that invader. The impact of that moment was not only physical, it was also psychological. The arrogance, the certainty that everything could be controlled, was destroyed there in that instant when nature showed its true face, a face that, no matter how hard we try to ignore it, is powerful and ruthless. That silent battle, which seemed to last an eternity, eventually revealed a hidden truth that many prefer to ignore, that the balance of the natural world is delicate, and that our presence is often an interruption in its routine. The force that was awakened by the impact of the door was a reminder that life has its own defense mechanisms, that it reacts in ways that we often could not understand at the time. And as the invader struggled, covered in a layer of bugs and pain, a silent message took hold. The impact of our decisions, however small they may seem, can trigger a chain of effects that change everything. The force of nature, which until then seemed subdued, has shown that it is the true guardian of its own territory, ready to act with intensity when it detects a threat. Now I want to go even deeper into this matter, as this story reveals something that goes far beyond the simple episode of invasion. It shows us that our choices, our impulsive actions, often trigger reactions we never imagined, which are hidden behind the scenes of the impact we have made on the world around us. Every decision, no matter how small it may seem, has the potential to trigger a transformation, a true learning journey where humility and respect for life become essential. The most surprising revelation of all this is that we are actually all connected to this cycle of cause and effect, and that the force of the universe often acts in a subtle but definitive way to remind us that balance is delicate, and that life itself, with its complexity, never fails to teach us. And in that instant, everything changed abruptly and unexpectedly. The impact of the blow that the invader gave to the structure of the barn was enough to trigger a reaction that seemed to have been stored away for years, hidden in the memory of that place. From the ceiling, an old nest of black marimbondos detached itself with force, as if it had been waiting for a moment of vulnerability to free itself. The fall was swift, almost like a move of pure revenge from the very force of nature. Within seconds, the air was filled with a deafening hum, a sound that seemed to vibrate in the soul of everything there, a symphony of chaos and aggressiveness. The darkness, which once seemed only the shadow of an ordinary night, was filled with movement, with shadows that stirred with an almost animal violence. The insects, awakened by that rupture, came out of hiding with a fury that could not be contained, forming a dark mass that spread through space with frightening speed. It was as if the sky itself had become a cloud of threats, a swarm of angry beings seeking revenge. The silence that had reigned before was replaced by an increase in sound, an incessant hum that seemed to grow and multiply at every instant. The black marimbondos, known for their potent sting and aggressiveness, had been awakened from their old slumber and now attacked with an intensity that gave no chance of escape. The scene seemed like something out of a nightmare, where chaos spread unchecked, a clear demonstration that the force of wildlife does not accept invasion, does not accept disrespect. It was a spectacle of pure transformation, a revelation of the impact a simple action can have behind the scenes of the natural world, changing the course of a story in seconds. The invader, who had hitherto thought himself invincible, now found himself on the front lines of a battle he could not win. His wide eyes, filled with fear, were desperately looking for a way out, an escape that could save him from that avalanche of angry insects. Every movement, every attempt to retreat, was immediately thwarted by the speed with which the marimbondos approached, like a black cloud of natural justice. His skin, once protected by confidence and arrogance, was now marked by painful stings, which became visible marks of an unequal struggle against a force much greater than he could imagine. Each bite felt like a stab, a cruel reminder that nature reacts with an intensity that no one can control, especially those who try to disrespect her. Chaos set in definitively, and the feeling of impotence took over that man who, until a few moments, thought he was capable of everything. His mind, which had once been full of plans and strategies, now found itself completely lost before the limit of vulnerability itself. His breathing became panting, his steps more disordered, as he desperately tried to escape the swarm that showed no signs of stopping. Each movement of escape was like an attempt to escape from a fate that seemed inevitable, a kind of natural punishment that manifests itself brutally and definitively. The impact of that moment was much more than physical. It was a real lesson in humility, a reminder that nature has its own rules, and that at its core it is a force of balance but also of justice. And as the man struggled, covered in a cloud of insects and pain, it became clear that what he had considered a simple invasion had triggered a reaction that would reverberate far beyond that instant. The strength of that swarm showed that often our actions have consequences that we can only understand when we are already in the midst of them, fighting for every breath, for every second of peace. The revelation that the impact of our decisions can trigger a chain of unpredictable effects is a hidden truth that many prefer to ignore. But there, at that moment, everything became clear. Life reacts, it does not forget, and its response can be as devastating as a storm that forms behind the scenes of heaven. And this force, which often goes unnoticed, is the real guardian of balance, ready to show its presence at the right time, and often in a way that no one expects. The swarm advanced like a living shadow, a dark, menacing mass that seemed to feed on the fear of this desperate man. Their movements were coordinated, almost like a revenge dance that only nature itself could orchestrate. The invader, seized with panic, tried to run, but every step turned into a race against an invisible army that had no compassion. The insects, moved by a primal force, crowded over his body, biting without stopping, as if they wanted to mark their definitive presence in the history of that moment. Their screams, mixed with the incessant hum, echoed through the fields, a symphony of suffering that seemed to last an eternity, a cruel reminder that no matter how hard we try to manipulate the world around us, there are forces that we cannot control. Each bite was a stab of pain, a demonstration that nature does not passively accept invaders. It reacts with an intensity that cuts deep into the human soul. The man tried to shake himself, swing his arms, desperate to push away the cloud of insects that seemed to be sticking to him like a second skin. His movements were frantic, almost like a dance of despair, hoping to escape from that relentless onslaught. But the more he tried, the more the marimbondos grouped together, forming a mass that covered his body from end to end. Their screams increased in intensity, mixing with the buzzing sound, forming a soundtrack of agony and struggle. His wide eyes reflected a mixture of fear, pain, and disbelief as he tried to find a way out, or at least a moment of truce in that unequal battle. But the swarm showed no signs of retreating. On the contrary, it advanced with a determination that seemed fueled by a greater force, a natural revenge that was not intimidated by the human effort to resist. Every moment the situation became more dramatic. The invader, who once had a posture of arrogance, now found himself completely vulnerable, a prey at the mercy of nature itself. His movements became more clumsy, almost like a desperate attempt to hide, to protect himself from a force that seemed to want to brand him as a symbol of arrogance before the world. The stings multiplied, leaving red marks that spread like open wounds, and he felt a pain that went beyond the physical, a pain that touched his soul, a sense of helplessness in the face of what seemed to be divine punishment. Their cries, before attempted resistance, now sounded like pleas for mercy that would not be granted. Fear, which was once a controlled emotion, turned into an avalanche of dread, a feeling that everything could end there, at that moment, in a tragedy that seemed inevitable. The scenery seemed like a scene of horror, a spectacle of natural destruction that spared no one. Insects, driven by an instinctive need for defense, have become an almost indomitable force. And as the man tried to escape, his figure grew smaller and smaller in the face of the relentless onslaught. His movements became slower, his strength seemed to run out, and the pain spread throughout his body. Her screams echoed, almost like a silent cry for help, a desperate prayer that it would all end. But nature, in its essence, knows no mercy. She reacts, she defends, she teaches. And in that instant, what seemed like a simple invasion turned into a brutal lesson, that the impact of our actions can trigger a chain of reactions that we can't always predict. Insects, with their strength and aggressiveness, have made it clear that the balance of the natural world is delicate, and that human arrogance is often an illusion. Each bite, each scream, each desperate movement was a manifestation of a battle that in fact had a single winner, the very strength of wildlife. When the dust settled and the scene calmed down, what remained was a heavy silence, marked by the marks on that man's body, and the memories of a lesson that would hardly be forgotten. The force that attacked him at that moment showed that no matter how hard we try to dominate the environment, there are limits that only nature itself knows how to establish. Now, when reflecting on all this, there is a feeling that true transformation happens in those moments when humility and respect for natural processes become essential, because often the greatest revelation is precisely in what we cannot see at first sight, between the lines of the impact that our decisions can generate. Outside, the farmer heard the noise of a chaotic mess that seemed to intensify by the second. He ran without hesitation, his heart pounding as he realized the gravity of what he was witnessing. When he arrived, what he saw was something he had never imagined happening on his property. The thief, that man who minutes before had entered with the intention of stealing grain, now found himself completely overpowered by a force of nature that showed no signs of backing down. The field, which once seemed quiet and peaceful, was now the scene of an almost surreal scene. The man ran in circles, desperate, trying to escape a cloud of black marimbondos that pursued him with a ferocity that seemed to come out of a real horror movie. Their cries of pain mingled with the deafening hum of insects, forming a symphony of despair that seemed to echo to the limits of the horizon. The farmer, paralyzed by a mixture of shock and disbelief, just watched the scene unfold before his eyes. It was as if there, he was witnessing nature itself, fulfilling its role in a brute, direct way, without intermediaries. The strength of the wildlife, which is often hidden behind the scenes, had shown itself in a crystal-clear way, revealing its true face. That episode was not just a lesson that nature reacts, but a demonstration of how she does it, with an intensity that few can comprehend at the time. The vulnerability of the attacker was clear at that moment. The arrogance of thinking that he could manipulate the environment and get away with it was completely destroyed by the savage force that awakened after the impact. The man was now nothing more than a desperate figure, almost like a puppet in the hands of insects. Their movements, once coordinated, became awkward and abrupt. He tried to dodge, hide, ease the pain with almost desperate attempts to shake off the marimbondos, but all was in vain. Every sting felt like a stab, every escape attempt a dashed hope. The scene felt like a powerful metaphor for how rash decisions can trigger reactions that are beyond our control. The impact of a small action, such as opening a door, can trigger a chain of effects that change everything irreversibly. And there, on that natural battlefield, the invader learned in pain that no matter how hard we try to dominate life, it always finds a way to defend itself. Meanwhile, the farmer watched everything with a mixture of fascination and sadness. It was as if he were watching a lesson in transformation unfold on his own property, a revelation that the impact of our decisions is something beyond immediate comprehension. The force of nature, which often seems silent and underestimated, has revealed itself as a true guardian of its limits, an entity that reacts ruthlessly when its secrets are threatened. At that moment, he realized that the story unfolding before his eyes was a mirror of what happens in the lives of all of us. Every choice, every decision, carries a consequence that can arise unexpectedly, often in a way that we only realize after the impact. And this revelation, which is impregnated in the memory, provokes us to reflect on our own journey, on our mentality in the face of challenges, and on how important it is to respect the behind the scenes of one's own destiny. What happens there in that instant goes far beyond the simple episode of a thief pursued by marimbondos. It is a narrative that reveals a hidden truth, the strength of the impact of our actions, and the transformative power they can unleash, often in ways we never imagined. And while the man finally manages to escape, his body scarred by the stings and his soul burdened with a hard lesson, the farmer stands there, watching that scene of natural chaos as someone who, in a way, has witnessed a profound transformation. A transformation that shows that no matter how hard we try to control the world around us, life itself has its defense mechanisms, its limits, and its responses. And perhaps precisely for this reason, the whole story of pain and resistance revealed, there also has a message of hope, that even in the most difficult situations, there is always an opportunity to learn, to evolve, to understand that the impact of our decisions is a journey of many revelations, a path that teaches us to respect the rhythm of the universe. After that chaos, silence once again dominated the field, but now it carried a different tension, a feeling that something had definitely been resolved, albeit in a way that no one could predict. Minutes later, the police siren cut through the air with its high-pitched melody, almost like a cry for help coming from a world that seemed to be at war. The officers arrived quickly, guided by the desperate cries that echoed through the field, and upon finding the invader lying on the ground, all they could perceive was a scene of utter defeat. The man, completely dazed, covered in stings and his face scarred by fear and pain, looked like a specter of someone who had faced a force beyond his comprehension. His wide eyes, trembling lips, and panting breath betrayed a state of deep shock, almost as if his soul had been scarred forever by that night of natural punishment. While the police tried to understand the situation, a heavy silence took over the place. The barn, on the other hand, remained intact, protected by an invisible but also implacable barrier, formed by a mass of black marimbondos who, at that moment, seemed to be at rest, like silent guardians of a secret that they themselves had fulfilled. The scene was almost poetic in its cruelty, a structure that had withstood time and human effort, now secured not by locks or latches, but by an army of insects that had undoubtedly fulfilled their mission to protect what was theirs. It was a clear demonstration that often the force of nature is stronger than any metal or wood, and that the true security of a place lies not in its physical appearance, but in its essence, in its connection with the living world and its invisible laws. The invader there on the ground looked like a figure who had been defeated not only by the efforts of the agents, but by a hidden truth that he had never been able to see. The strength of wildlife, which is often underestimated or considered lesser in the face of human power, has shown itself definitively. His response was direct, swift, relentless. And while the police officers tried to calm the man who now begged for help, a sense of irrefutable defeat hung in the air. No matter how much he had planned, no matter how much he believed in his cunning or his speed, nature, with its own strength and logic, had made itself present in a way that no one could dispute. There at that moment, it became evident that the battle was not just against the invader, but against a larger force that rules the natural world. The story of that man, who tried to invade a property and ended up being the victim of a biological revenge, carried a lesson that resonates to this day. Our actions, no matter how minor they may seem, always leave marks that can trigger unexpected consequences. In the end, the defeat of that invader was inevitable. As he tried to challenge the backstage of the universe, the essence that maintains the balance between life and death, respect and disrespect. All of this revealed that no matter how hard we try to manipulate or dominate, the real strength lies in connecting with the natural world, in understanding that our decisions have an impact, and that, often, that impact is a lesson we carry with us for life. As the police helped the man to his feet, a deeper thought formed in the head of those watching. The victory was not only from the environment, it was not a simple punishment, but a proof that the whole chain of causes and effects works, even if silently and invisibly most of the time. The backstage of the universe often acts in silence, waiting for the right moment to make its hidden truth prevail. And that episode, with all its natural brutality, reinforces that true transformation happens when we have the humility to understand that, no matter how much we think we are the masters of our destiny, we are always subject to forces that surpass us, that challenge us to rethink our actions, our decisions, and our own mentalities in the face of the impact we can generate. In the silence that settled after the departure of the police, there was a feeling that that night had been a kind of reintegration ritual, a confirmation that respect for the backstage of life is essential to maintain balance. The defeat of that invader symbolically represented a universal truth. The force of nature, with its own logic, always finds a way to manifest itself, to protect its secrets, and to teach us that the impact of our actions is not something we can ignore, much less manipulate. And as we reflect on all this, it becomes clear that our own decisions, however minor, carry a responsibility that goes far beyond what we can see on the surface. Because deep down, the whole journey of transformation begins with the understanding that the natural world is a web of invisible connections, and that the impact we leave on it is an imprint that carries our essence. Perhaps more than anything, this is a lesson in humility, a constant opportunity to learn to respect the backstage of the universe, where the true revelations about balance and life are hidden between the lines. Now I want to go even deeper into this matter, because this story reveals to us something that goes far beyond a simple episode of invasion and attack by marimbondos. It makes us reflect on the true power of transformation and the impact that our decisions can have on our trajectory, especially when we understand that there is a hidden truth behind every action. Often in the rush to achieve a goal, or in the arrogance of thinking that we can manipulate the environment around us, we end up awakening forces that we cannot control, and these forces, as in the case of that invader, manifest themselves in a brutal and definitive way. It is a lesson that our mindset, our choices, and even the moment we decide to act carry enormous responsibility, since everything we do leaves marks, often invisible, that can turn into unexpected consequences. Impact, in this sense, is a bridge that connects our actions to the results, and this connection often becomes clear only after the damage has already been done, after the pain has already been felt. That man's story, for example, is not just an account of natural punishment, but a narrative that reveals how the universe works behind the scenes, quietly yet powerfully. The impact of a single act, opening a door, a window, an opportunity, can trigger a chain of revelations that change the course of everything. In fact, we are all on a constant journey of discovery, where every decision reveals a hidden facet of our own understanding, a truth that we may never want to see, but that is fundamental for those who truly want to evolve. It is not just about avoiding mistakes, but about understanding that the impact of our actions is a daily construction, a kind of legacy that we leave in our own history and in the history of the world around us. And this understanding leads us to rethink how important it is to develop a more conscious mentality, more respectful of natural processes, and more humble in the face of what we cannot control. By realizing how much everything can be transformed with a single decision, we become more attentive to what we feed in our minds, our intentions, and the way we face difficulties. Because in essence, true transformation happens when we learn to listen to what experiences teach us, even if those experiences come in the form of pain or hard lessons to accept. It is at this moment that we realize that the deepest revelations are hidden in the details of our journey, the impact we have made, and the way we react to it. Each episode, each event, carries a message that can propel us into a new phase of growth, as long as we have the courage to see beyond the surface, to go beyond the immediate reaction and seek the learning that lies behind the consequences. Just like the strength of the black marimbondos, who have awakened to protect their territory, our actions can also generate a reaction that forces us to rethink our own limits. The story of the invader reminds us that the universe is not a passive entity, but a force that responds with intelligence and intensity to our attitudes. And when we understand this, we begin to realize that the impact is not just something external, but an internal manifestation of our own choices. The more aware we become of this connection, the more we can shape our journey in a way that is aligned with respect for life, balance, and the invisible forces that govern everything around us. It is an opportunity to transform our mentality, to learn to act more wisely, and to understand that often the greatest strength lies in the humility of recognizing that we do not control everything, but we can learn from everything. Ultimately, this story stands as a silent invitation to reflect on our own actions and impacts. Because deep down, no one wants to live an experience similar to that invader, a lesson that came from a natural force, from a punishment that was both physical and spiritual. And at the same time, it shows us that all transformation begins with the awareness that our decisions, however small they may seem, carry enormous responsibility, and that their impact can reverberate in surprising ways in our journey of growth. Thus, as we look at this episode, we can realize that true learning is not in punishment, but in the opportunity to understand how much we are connected to the invisible forces of the universe, a connection that challenges us to develop a more mature mindset, more respectful, more aligned with the hidden truth that often only reveals itself after impact. And as we reflect on this, a question remains in the air. To what extent are we aware of our actions, our decisions, and the impact they can have on our history and the history of the world around us? If you've made it this far, it's because you've really taken an interest in this story and the lessons it brings about the impact of our actions and the strength of the natural world. I believe that reflecting on these episodes helps us understand that our decisions have weight, many times greater than we imagine, and that respect for the environment is essential to maintain balance. If this content made sense to you, how about subscribing to the channel so we can continue to exchange ideas, learn together, and bring stories that make us think about the world around us. Leave here in the comments a phrase that shows that you followed it to the end, such as "I'm with you until the end," or "This message was for me." This makes it easier to see who really connects with this conversation and who likes to reflect on these topics. And if the story touched you in any way, a light like here in the video also helps strengthen that connection. There is a video here on the side that complements this subject. Click and continue with me there. I'm sure you'll enjoy checking it out, as each story brings a new perspective for us to reflect on our actions and the impact they generate. So stay with me, because there is still so much more to explore and learn. Until the next content.